Is the DACA issue going to the Supreme Court? Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Friends, welcome to our Last Days Beacon program for today. This is David Schnitker. The purpose of our program, indeed the purpose of our entire ministry, is to equip you as an end-time saint. Thanks for tuning in. It is a great privilege to have Bill Olson on the show today. Bill is a constitutional attorney in the Washington, D.C. area. His law firm is on the front lines of liberties in America's courts, particularly in the highest court of our land, the Supreme Court. As such, his firm has brought more than 100 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. We're going to be discussing one of those cases in just a few minutes. But first, I want to welcome Bill to the program. Bill, thanks for joining us today.
It's nice to be back, David. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, how is the swamp doing? We'll just start with that question. Since you are planted firmly in the swamp, I hope the swamp creatures have left you alone a little bit.
It's expanding from the District of Columbia into the suburbs with a predictable political result as people continue to depend on the government for all aspects of their life and want it to become bigger and better and stronger and more powerful. It's a very dangerous world we live in.
It really is. And I know your heart and the purpose of your law firm is to try to limit and push back on the encroachments of government. So tell us about your law firm and give our listeners your website address.
Well, we have a small firm. It's in Virginia. We have 4 lawyers. It's the name of the firm is just William J. Olson, PC. Our web address is lawandfreedom.com. And one of our lawyers in our firm is Herb Titus, who used to be the founding dean of Regent Law School and taught constitutional law for 27 years. So we get involved in lots and lots of interesting cases. And as you mentioned before, we've now filed, I think, 134 amicus briefs in the U.S. Supreme Court and about another 65 in lower federal courts. And so we've been at this for quite a while and enjoy the opportunity to present sound constitutional originalist concepts and even biblical analyses where appropriate.
Well, that's very refreshing. I think sometimes Christians in the heartland are unaware that there are biblical and constitutional Christians who represent us at the highest levels of the judiciary. So it's a great comfort to me, and I'm sure for our listeners as well, to know that with every case you try to bring not only a sound constitutional perspective, but also an orthodox biblical perspective as well. Let me just put in a good word about your website, lawandfreedom.com. That's A-N-D, freedom.com. That website itself is an educational website, and maybe you could say a little bit about some of the topics that are covered on that website.
Well, pretty much it has actual copies of all of the briefs we filed over the years, all of the presentations and oral arguments and articles and about our work or articles by us. So it has something close to 500 different entries on there, and they're all categorized and easy to search. And if you're looking for an article on abortion or some other issue, we probably have written about it.
Now, you also have another web venture that is educational in nature. It is called biblicalgrid.com. Could you tell our listeners about that website?
We do. We set that up in order to preserve links for lots of conservative and Christian organizations that were losing their ability to have dissemination of their address through social media. I haven't spent much time with it lately, but I hope to soon groups like Southwest Prophecy, and try to now, as especially YouTube is now talking about shutting down more and more channels, making people's views unavailable to the public. We want to try to give a link to all of the groups that we think are doing good work and are being intentionally silenced by the world system.
Well, I appreciate your effort. Your website, biblicalgrid.com, is also linked on the homepage of this ministry's website, swpm.us. So if folks forget biblicalgrid.com, you can go to our website, and on the homepage, prominently displayed, is a link that will take you directly into biblicalgrid.com. And the last time I clicked on that link, I noticed, Bill, that the previous podcasts that we have done are all prominently featured on the homepage of biblicalgrid.com.
We give you great visibility on that website.
Yes, and I hope if things go well that perhaps this podcast will also end up on your homepage. So we all support each other in the work of liberty. Well, my next question is a big question. You don't have to give us a big answer, but just in brief, from your heart, why do you think Americans, particularly American Christians, should care about the issue of illegal immigration?
Well, there are many reasons. I'll start with a political reason. We need to have a nation that's composed of people who have an appreciation for what Western civilization has accomplished, what Christianity has built into the society. We need people who share a common vision of the country, have common values, and certainly now we're finding, as particularly as the border was undefended completely before Trump, and now that judges have been trying to prevent him from defend it, that the nation's just been swarmed with people from failed cultures, where they're used to socialistic type governments. They're supportive of big government. They are dismissive of things like gun rights. They want more social programs. They don't care about free speech. The number of immigrants coming to the United States from some of these other failed states, and of course Mexico is the overwhelming supplier of immigrants at the southwest border, but we find that those people do not want to have limited government, do not respect constitutional liberties. And we're not saying everyone, but on polling, it's something like either 80-20 against conservative and Christian principles, sometimes it's down to 65% against. But if you let in too many people, as we have been, as a matter of fact, we had just in the first 10 months of fiscal 2019, something like 680,000 apprehensions at the border. All those people work their way in the country. They change the society. There's a discussion that we should be replaced. That the Americans are good enough, so we're going to open the border and have a new kind of person here. And if they shared our values, it'd be one thing. But if they do not respect the culture of the society and the values, that's quite another.
Many of them end up making their way onto our voting rolls and become dependable Democrat voters. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, it's astonishing. I mean, something, depending on the survey again, it's somewhere between 65 and 80% of illegal immigrants are on one or another form of welfare, usually several. And particularly in states which have same-day registration, they show up to vote, they're allowed to vote, and all of a sudden they're determining the future for America. And nobody that I know, other than our rulers in Washington, ever were asked their opinion as to whether they want it to be that way.
I like what Michael Savage has said in terms of his definition of a nation. He says, you have no nation without borders, a common language, and a common culture. And when you have open borders, that destroys all three, doesn't it? It
does. I mean, when the dispersion occurred after the Tower of Babel incident, it was for the protection of people. They were sent to different parts of the world, their language confused, and now we're trying to undo what God did at the Tower of Babel. It's not a good idea. It's not going to end well.
Now, are you saying, this might sound a little inflammatory, are you saying that God is a nationalist as opposed to a globalist?
He's a nationalist of each country.
It does seem to be in the plan of God that he opposed collectivism or the globalism of Nimrod's day and did everything he could to scatter the nations into their own separate cultures, and that's for the protection of humanity, it appears to me.
Yeah, so that never again would mankind unite through something like the United Nations, I would say, to make an assault upon heaven. Then it was physical, now it's other types.
And this subject for another day, but we have, of course, the New World Order that politicians have been espousing for the last 70 or 80 years, which again is the old collectivist scheme of globalism with centralized control over everything. And of course, we see that portrayed and predicted in the Bible as the Antichrist system, which Christ will physically oppose at his second coming. So globalism is not an idea that you find supported in the Bible, and I think it's relevant to our subject today, which is illegal immigration. So let's get right down to that subject. Your law firm is involved in a very important Supreme Court case pertaining to the DACA issue. First of all, tell us what that acronym DACA stands for, and then tell us about what's going on in the Supreme Court right now pertaining to the DACA issue.
Well, DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and it was a program established by President Obama in 2012 trying to find an excuse not to deport persons in the United States who were unlawfully here. There were certain requirements to participate in this program. They had to have come to the country as children under a certain age. They could not be in excess of 31 years old at the time they applied for the program. They couldn't have committed felonies. They had to be in school or whatever. But what it would do is give them a work permit and the ability to, for a 2-year period, know they would not be deported, and then that would be renewed. So, and the reason that DACA was adopted was that Obama was unable to get Congress to pass his famous DREAM Act, which is where we get the term dreamer from. So, since he couldn't get Congress to do it, he decided he would do it himself, and he would just have a broad policy not to enforce the law to deport people here illegally.
So this was an executive order that is in conflict with the federal immigration laws that have been passed by Congress?
Yeah, the federal immigration laws have always given the executive a measure of discretion over who was here that would be deported, what priorities would be given. You can't get everybody at once, so they would always let the president decide who would be most dangerous, most appropriate to go first. But and usually those types of decisions were made on a case-by-case basis. But now Obama comes along and he says, if you came here as a child and you meet certain basic requirements, then we're not going to take any action against any of you. And it turned out that there were about 900,000 of these people in the country.
So the Supreme Court issues that you are presenting, would they have the intended effect of overturning the executive order?
Well, immediately upon President Trump deciding to change policy, and what he was doing is revoking a non-enforcement policy. You see, Obama had put in the non-enforcement policy, and the president said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We'll enforce the law from now on. And immediately we have cases filed around the country. We have injunctions issued. We had gone in the United States 175 years without what's called a nationwide injunction, where a district court just takes over the policy of the country. They'd never been issued for 175 years of our history, and all of a sudden now they're under President Trump, since the Obama judges were viewed themselves, it appears, as a stay-behind army to restrict and take pot shots at President Trump to keep him from undoing any of the good things that Obama had done. They decided to enjoin him, and there actually been, if you can believe this, 27 different, at last count, district courts that have enjoined the president nationally on cases of this sort, where they basically take over enforcement of federal laws and stymie the president from coast to coast.
So it's almost as if we have 27 presidents and none of them are elected.
Exactly. And matter of fact, in one of these cases, they said, we're doing the people a favor because we'll have more accountability this way. Well, judges are the least accountable people in the entire country. I mean, they're unelected. They don't run for office. As long as they don't do something terribly corrupt, they're in for life. They have lifetime salaries. It's extraordinary the power they have. And once they just get outside the box we have them in of deciding actual cases and controversies and just deciding disputes between parties, if they think that they know better than the president how to run the nation's immigration policy, we're all in trouble. But that's what happened. They issued injunctions. Courts of appeals have upheld them. Of course, now President Trump has appointed something like 165 federal judges, so some of these circuit courts are now swinging over to have Republican majority. They're much less likely to be supporting these. But, here we are more than 3 years into the administration, and virtually everything the president wants to do to change policy, the Democrat judges come in and say, nope, we like the old policies, too bad. And they come up with some bogus reason to enjoin the president. And that's what happened here.
So this brief that you're working with before the Supreme Court, could you kind of give us a status report on, and the prospects for, how should we say, correction of this unlawful edict by President Obama?
Yeah, we actually filed 4 briefs supporting the president on his DACA rescission in 2018 and 2019 in the Second Circuit and in the Supreme Court. Most recently, the Supreme Court did agree to take the case. First, they refused, and they finally agreed. They took the case, and oral argument was about a month ago. So a decision will probably come down early next year, maybe February, one would hope. And we'll see what they do. The oral argument was not entirely reassuring because, of all people, Justice Gorsuch sounded like to many that he was trying to find a way to uphold the DACA program. And he asked questions as to whether the federal government had considered the reliance issue. In other words, these people had been DACA beneficiaries. They had expected it would continue. Well, it would only continue for 2 years, and for them to have an expectation it would continue beyond that would be unrealistic. And for Gorsuch to be worried about these reliance issues, were they adequately considered by the Trump administration, strikes me as quite beside the point. But it just gives you the conclusion that the Democrat judges vote to uphold big government, and the Republican judges aren't so sure. So we may see Justice Roberts support Trump or not. We may see Justice Gorsuch support Trump or not. The rest of the court is pretty much certain how they'll vote. So this is certainly a matter for prayer. There's no guarantee we're going to win this.
And by the way, when we send out this podcast, which will be heard at the end of December, we will have the links to the 4 briefs that you have already filed, so folks can get a little bit more in the way of background material on this issue. Well, we're going to take a quick time out now to hear from our sponsor. We are so excited to partner with a new commercial sponsor to help us with the cost of these podcasts. Our new sponsor is Jingos. Jingos is an ultra stain remover and odor eliminator. It attacks stains and odors and is environmentally and user-friendly. We use this in our house, and take it from me, this stuff really works. Plus, by buying Jingos, you not only help yourself, but also help us stay on the air. One satisfied customer writes, "Our dog Charlie came home after being sprayed by a skunk. I tried shampooing with tomato juice and several dog shampoos, but nothing worked. I sprayed him with a new product called Jingos, and the odor disappeared immediately. What an awesome product." That is from Eileen in Wisconsin. Please stay tuned for more details.
By Jingos, it's amazingly fresh and clean out here in beautiful New Zealand. G'day America, I'm Tabi, and I want to tell you about my new ultimate stain and odour remover, Jingos. My Jingos gunk gobblers will tackle stubborn organic stains and eliminate nasty stinking odours at the same time. Jingos effectively removes those little accidents like wine, coffee, dirt, blood, grass, even pet stains, and odours like fish, garlic, even skunk. Jingos is environmentally friendly, safe for use on fabrics, carpet, upholstery, and it works great as a laundry pre-soak on the worst pet or people accidents. Come on America, what are you waiting for? Just go online and order your Jingos for $12.95 and get a 4-ounce travel pack free. Crikey, pay $19.95 and I'll double your order. That's 2 large Jingos and 2 travel packs for just $19.95. Blasted seagulls, where's my Jingos?
Welcome back. We've been talking with Bill Olson, constitutional lawyer from Washington, D.C. His law firm has presented over 100 cases, 134 to be exact, before the Supreme Court of the United States. And we've been talking about the DACA case that pertains to Obama's executive order giving a deferred action for minors who are in the country illegally. Well, Bill, let's transition to this, perhaps to a more of a waterfront approach. Could you share with us if there are other cases pertaining to illegal immigration that we should be apprised of?
Yes, as a matter of fact, one of them has 4 briefs that are scheduled for filing this month, and we may be filing briefs in some of these. It has to do with an effort by President Trump to implement a statute that has been in the law for years, but again was overlooked by President Obama and indeed by the Bushes and Clintons before him. It's called the Public Charge Rule. There's a provision in the Immigration and Naturalization Act. It's 212A4. If anybody wanted to look it up, and it says that the country would not admit immigrants if they were determined to be likely to become a public charge. In other words, they would be on welfare. They would need to have benefits that they wouldn't be able to take care of themselves. I mean, this has always been the rule from when, my grandparents came to the United States at the turn of the century. If you were going to impose a burden on the society, the American government didn't want to have you here. And so this is really a wonderful proposal by President Trump. He's been doing many things he doesn't get credit for, just gets criticized for. And this is a terrific rule getting rid of a 1999 Clinton proposal which disregarded this. It basically wiped it off the books, but now he's bringing it back. And of course, cases are filed in places like San Francisco and New York and D.C. and Maryland. Those are the frequently places courts are most likely to enjoin the president. And they've already done that. And now the cases go up to 4 circuits, 2nd, 4th, 7th, and 9th. Briefing occurs this month, and we'll see. The point is, David, we've got to turn off the magnet that is drawing people in the United States, because they come here saying, well, we're going to get free medical care, we're going to get we're going to get free housing, we're going to get food stamps. It's going to be great. And if we can turn that off and say people who can't take care of themselves just can't come into the country, that would be a phenomenal reduction in the number of people coming who don't share our values.
Absolutely. And I did read an encouraging article recently that with the cessation of our catch and release program, that we are seeing a diminishing number of apprehensions on our southern border. So I think what you're saying is beginning to take effect already. The power of the magnet is being decreased. The enforcement is being increased. Of course, every mile of real border wall that is erected also has a positive impact. So do you begin to see a beginning of the turning of the tide as it relates to this issue?
Well, I think so, but it's certainly going to take another term for the president to really implement these things, because now that he's shifted several of the circuit courts from Democrat judges, of course, Chief Justice Roberts say there are no Democrat judges, there are no Republican judges, they're just judges. Well, look at how they rule. The judges who've been implementing these injunctions against Trump at every step are almost always appointed by Clinton or Obama. So they, by their actions, demonstrate themselves to be Democrat judges.
Right. It takes a while to clean out the swamp, doesn't it?
Well, he's got a long way to go.
I guess that's why God created mortality at the fall, so that it would, in a natural biological sense, it does have a cleaning effect. But we need a few more years for that swamp cleaning to, how should we say, have a more of a marked impact on our country.
Well, it'll never be totally clean, but we know that as a biblical principle, I think, but at least we can have some common sense in government, which would be a radical change from the past.
That would certainly require an adjustment in our thinking, to think of the government in a rational sort of way. Final question for today, Bill. We're almost out of time. What can our listeners do to have a positive influence in securing America's borders?
Well, as with many of these issues, there's a limited number of things that can be done, but we certainly don't have to give our consent to having open borders. We don't have to feel that if we take a position supporting President Trump on these immigration issues that we're somehow doing something wrong. Actually, I think we're doing what we're supposed to be doing from proper application of biblical principles. We don't want to employ illegal aliens if we can, for gardening or home repair or whatever. It's roofing. I mean, it's just that's part of the magnet, and if we employ them, we're part of the problem. Just because the government doesn't enforce the law, that doesn't mean that we can't help enforce the law. I mean, people could look at some of these briefs, begin to understand the cases. They're on our website, lawandfreedom.com. If they like to read, that's one place to find them. Obviously, it's another place where you can petition the government, but the problem is we've got weaknesses in both parties. The Democrats want these people into the country so that they can vote Democrat, and the Republicans want them in the country so they can be their maids and gardeners and work cheaply in chicken factories. So it's both parties are the problem. You can petition these people, but our voices are very small voices compared to the rich and powerful. It's just the way the world works. But we certainly can pray that God would spare us from an additional influx of people who don't share American values and really don't want to be here except to change the country or for what they can get for themselves.
I think what you're also intimating, beyond the efficacy of prayer, which is always appropriate, is the importance of political involvement and certainly finding and supporting and voting for constitutional candidates that will uphold the Constitution and understand biblical principles as it relates to national sovereignty and the importance of secure borders. In other words, you get the personnel creates policy. And as we're looking forward to the 2020 election, there needs to be a house cleaning in Congress, of course. And it may be that we need to be looking as individuals at those in our district, in the House or in the Senate, if we have senatorial races, looking for those who have a clear policy on protecting national sovereignty and secure borders, and vote out the people who don't vote in that way. And so that those folks newly arrived in Congress can support President Trump's efforts to secure America's borders.
Very much so. The problem is, of course, that it's not as simple as Republicans versus Democrats, because although almost all Democrats are for open borders, there's so many of these Chamber of Commerce Republicans who simply will support opening the floodgates in order to have cheap labor to drive the prices, to drive the costs of manufacturing. Well, we don't actually manufacture much anymore, but agriculture and processing of food and that sort of thing. And it's a very sad thing. They put their own pocketbook ahead of the national interest. So we have to be wary of what they say. We have to believe in what they do and not what they say on the stump when they're campaigning.
I agree. Somebody has said that we used to think of the American divide as it relates to political parties. It's Republican versus Democrat. As I ponder and observe these things, it seems to me that the real political divide is between nationalists, and I mean that in a very positive way, as we've been discussing, versus globalists. In other words, people who believe in national sovereignty, the rule of law, secure borders, protecting the citizenry, traditional constitutional values, of course, versus the open borders crowd, who, for the reasons that you have articulated, really believe that for their interests that open borders serve them better. So I see the divide as between nationalists and globalists. What say ye?
Oh, I think you're exactly right. I mean, if we continue along the path of this homogenization of nations and not treating the United States as a different kind of place, we're going to lose the ability to proclaim the gospel from the nation to the world, and we're going to see a country where Christianity is held in contempt. Dangerous days are ahead, probably, and probably the thing we have to fear the most is God's wrath from the behavior of the nation.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought in the spiritual aspect. There is a spiritual aspect. America has historically been a bulwark for the gospel, the vanguard of nations as it relates to the propagation of the Christian faith. If that is homogenized and replaced by folks who don't share those uniquely American/Protestant/Puritan values, then the light goes out in America, much like the light has pretty well gone out in England over the last 150 years. So there are spiritual stakes as well in this whole issue.
We also vote with our dollars. I mean, Netflix has some rather blasphemous stuff coming out, I understand, and if we subscribe to them, we support that. If we're called to be on a grand jury and we vote to indict someone just because a prosecutor doesn't like him, who hasn't really committed a crime of any meaning or a crime that really shouldn't exist, and we vote to indict, we're part of the problem. If we're on a petty jury and we're asked to convict and the person really didn't do anything or has a good defense and they haven't proven their case, we can't trust the government. We can't trust the FBI agent who testifies. We have to do our job as voters, as members of juries, as consumers. We have to think of all this as being part of the problem or part of the solution. So there are many ways we can act, and we have to withhold our consent from evil. The government requires our consent. We don't have to cooperate with evil.
Absolutely. Well, with that note, Bill, we're out of time for today's show. Thanks for joining me for this very important discussion today.
Very good. Lots of fun. Thank you, David.
Okay. Well, friends, thank you for joining us for today's podcast. I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, this is David Schnitker. Thanks for listening.